This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Today's guest did an undergrad double major in actuarial sciences and statistics and econ from UMass Amherst, stayed there for a master's in business and analytics, and then doubled down with an MBA in business analytics and machine learning from Babson. His career has spanned sourcing, financial analysis, and general analytics. He's worked in the biotech, manufacturing, and hospitality industries for huge names such as Boston Scientific, Biogen, Cognex, and Sonesta. Please welcome Director of Commercial Analytics at Extended Stay America, Kaushik Meneni. Welcome to the show, Kaushik.
Thank you, Ryan. Happy to be here and appreciate you saying all that. It means a lot.
Yeah. Well, we like to get everybody gassed up, give all the listeners an idea of just why they should listen to your experience. So I'm super pumped to dive into that. What is one thing you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
That's a great question, Ryan. And I think the great way to start that is by saying data is an ever changing thing, it's a machine on its own. So when we try to make a decision, you have to ask, how quickly are we making that decision? Is that data going to impact us on a daily level, weekly level, or a monthly level? Because I can give you three different answers with the data based off that question. So it's really important to look at data as a living, breathing thing.
I like that. We haven't had the opportunity to talk a lot about this concept, but it's one that I personally have interacted with quite a bit over the years. I think that for some folks, there may be this idea that for every given question, there's one right answer, and the data are supposed to just tell us that if we do our job right.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit more about why that's not a great assumption.
Well, um, as you know, a lot of things change and the amount of data aspects that you put in impact that data driven decision. And if I give you a small outlook on what you're looking for, let me give you an example. We're looking at quarterly performance, right? And depending on your industry, that changes very drastically. For example, right now I'm in the hospitality space. And if a storm hits us, that changes the way we do rates, the way we do promos, etc. But now if I'm in, for example, in sales within a tech company, I'm not really impacted by storms. But then maybe I'm impacted by more interest rates, seeing the economy change, right? So different data points impact those decisions. And it's really good to be dynamic about certain decisions as well.
Yeah, I think one of the conversations when it comes to data analytics, business intelligence, FP&A, all of this stuff, is it feels a little bit like we're kind of firmly divided between, okay, we want to do a good job of describing what happened. And with the past, assuming that you have well-defined business logic, that really is one of those places where, okay, well, what was our revenue for a given month? Like that should be objectively one answer.
Right.
On the other hand, one of the most difficult and also arguably more valuable pieces is trying to figure out what we should do going forward.
Right.
And I think that's the area where taking different things into account and realizing that there are multiple approaches that a business can take to meet the market situation, that's where things get a little bit more flexible. And I think that you're right. Like looking at different timelines generate different results.
hmm And a great point too I want to make is when you mentioned the revenue for the previous month. But if you break it down by department, each department will look at that differently, right? How did
Mm,
sales impact that revenue? How did our marketing team impact that revenue? And how much did it really contribute to their overall revenue? And how does that then trickle down from what finance reports as, right, the overall number to how much sales and marketing really impacted those total revenue numbers? So it's interesting that yes, FP&A looks at this final number. That's what the company generated, but sales and marketing and other aspects of the company that's generated revenue will look at that number and say, that's not exactly what we hit. There was nuances to that data points that I want to make
mm,
sure finance and less of and all of leadership knows.
yeah. It obviously, in the name of the podcast, you can tell what part of the data and analytics process we think is the most important, right? It's really if we are not undertaking action through decisions that are made with the better provisioning of data, we're kind of not really fulfilling our value proposition.
Agreed.
But I think another common theme that we've had here is figuring out what the real question is. Sometimes someone will come to us with an ask, and you have to do a little bit of digging, asking some follow-up questions to figure out, okay, like what is the real business question that we're trying to answer?
Right.
And I think that the point you brought up is really a key element of that. So, for example, like you talk about, like a quarterly number, it makes me think a lot of kind of publicly traded companies. There was a letter, I think that was like spearheaded by Warren Buffett and signed by, a whole slew of other, kind of big company CEOs where they were talking about the difference in time perspectives when you're making decisions. So obviously a lot of publicly traded companies are very focused on kind of quarter to quarter. If they're doing something where they're making a huge investment in one quarter that may not pay off for a year, 2 years, 5 years, lots of times the market can price that unfavorably. And so Warren Buffett came out with this letter and was like, "Hey, it's in the best interest of businesses to take a longer time perspective, to think about things longer."
Hmm.
So kind of connecting those two ideas, if the question is, what can we do to increase revenue this month? The answer to that is very different from what can we do to increase revenue in 10 years.
Right.
So you had mentioned how quickly are we making the decision. I also think an interesting point is how quickly are we expecting the results? Because
Right.
the game plan's totally different.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed. And I think that's where a roadmap comes into play, and also looking at what you've done in the past against that roadmap too. And a big thing that I'm working on now, it being December for next year, is figuring out how will we take the steps by month to showcase for the full year for revenue growth, right? And it's very interesting I know in analytics, always talk about how is this department doing in terms of the analysis and how can they drive revenue? But what sometimes you have to do is the collaboration between the departments. So right now I'm working with marketing, sales, and kind of our call center to say, if we are going to change some things next year for our marketing, how will that impact our sales? Is it going to take away from sales, or is it going to improve on our sales department? So there's the cannibalization between different departments that we want to prevent, that will also grow revenue at the same time. And it's very tricky to figure out the levers on, if I pull this, how will that impact a different department, right? Because obviously everyone wants to grow, show that they're the ones responsible for the growth, but at the same time, I don't want to hurt them either.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me as difficult with this concept is if it's you and we're working really, really closely together, just two people, you come to me with a question, I take the time, I really, dig deep, I understand what's the timeline, what's the important data, like what's the depth of the like all of the questions that we talk about on here as being important. You're on the same page, I'm on the same page. I build a report, gives you really, really clear, digestible information. Great. Fantastic. That works really, really well. However, it is outside of like the very most important analyses that get done with some of the biggest positions at a given organization. Very rare that I get to spend a very large amount of time with a single report consumer, dial it in exactly for them, make sure that they have a full understanding of all of the logic that went into it, how to use the tool. So, in a situation where you're at a larger organization and you have to make something that a large number of people are consuming, how do you strike the balance of building something that is dynamic enough to show how the data and the information and the inferred decisions change over time with a large number of consumers that may not be familiar with that? How do you battle that in a large org?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I kinda learned this at an earlier part of my career, where it's always good to start as a top-down report, and what I mean by that is whoever your use case is for, who's the top of the chain there? Is it the director or the VP looking at this data that they care? And then I say, what do they care about, right? Show them the key metrics outlined and saying, this is what you're chasing, and this is what how the data breaks down. And then after that, then you kind of go down into the manager, the analyst level, or in saying, this is where you want them to kind of investigate those KPIs and say, where was the data driving from? Was it coming from a certain state, or was there a certain channel of data that we saw a decrease in? That data should be in the second layer of your report for then the managers to then roll back up to the top and saying, your KPI of X revenue went down this much due to this. And so you have a full flow state from top down that allows everyone to be aligned. So, and then what the great thing is, I always get their approval on that report, which allows everyone else to kind of follow line saying, my leader's using this, I should use it as well. To that way you have a clear communication of the data and the numbers. Because we all know data is never clean, but if you can guide them to the right place, the data seems set in a way.
I love that. First off, anytime someone is super tangible, I always like to show appreciation. I love that. That's something that, I could take away today. In addition, it seems to me to map to this concept of ensuring that there is a hammered out strategy. So, my background is in math. I had long hair and I like worked at a whiteboard and just like played with problems that were intellectually stimulating to me, but of dubious use to anybody else. And so when I came into the business world, I definitely had to fight against that kind of internal mentality I have of like, we're just doing fun, cool technical things and I want to build beautiful tech and I want to, have it be elegant and I want, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I, over time, was kind of beaten into submission. It's like, no, 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 you really got to focus on results. And in the beginning, I had felt a little bit like, "Oh, okay," you see all the, corporate values and, what is our strategy? And you're like, "Okay, this sounds like a little bit of fluff to me." Over time, I have come to realize that I totally had that backwards, right? Like, if I build elegant tech, even if it gives great answers, if those answers aren't to questions that meaningfully drive an organization forward according to like a well thought out strategy, it was pointless. It was a waste of money.
Yeah.
So for me, I kind of visualize this like exactly as you were talking about with that top down report. There's kind of this like hierarchy of questions that have to be answered. Like, number one, what is the purpose of this company? Like, what are we trying to do with the life of this organization?
Right.
Number two, what is our game plan for trying to get there on a lot of different timelines? And number 3, even though it feels just so squishy for a data and analytics person, what are some of the values that we have? How do we want to approach problems generally? When we have that, it okay, cool. That's the backbone of a company strategy. One of the big things we talk about on the podcast is that data strategy is not something separate from business strategy. Data and all of the tech that we use around it are just tools for achieving that business strategy. So, if we know that, then it's like, okay, well, we have the strategy, we have the KPIs for the leaders at the top of the organization, and then ideally, all of the KPIs for everybody else kind of roll up and drive that focus forward.
Correct.
However, that's a lot of framework. That's a lot to get up. What recommendations do you have, especially for someone who may not be the CEO of a large organization, for how to drive towards having that framework? And then within that framework, how to achieve results as far as using the data and driving that kind of hierarchical performance?
That's a great and deep question, Ryan. Thanks for giving that to me. And, I think we have to think about who are we as data people within an organization? In my mind, we are the helpers and we are the people who help support the decision. We are not necessarily, in my opinion, driving it. We are guiding it. And in my mind, there's a big difference. We guide it through data and we tell them, hey, these are the recommendations we make. But at the end of the day, right? In my opinion, it's the leader's decision to make that. We are just supporting them on the side. And I think the same thing goes for in this case where you're mentioning, how do we come up with these goals for next year or using data? And in my opinion, it's understanding it. And that's a cool thing about what we do is no matter what department or what company or industry you're in, we have to become kind of the absorbers of the data, really understand it and come with a different perspective that they're not used to. And I think that's what they love about us as data analysts or data driven people is we're coming with a fresh perspective that they're not used to because they're so head down in the data. So when I give them analysis on previous what they've done previously and be more realistic about the growth, right? There's obviously these economic changes that have no control over, but we can at least say the temperament of what we think the climate will be for next year. And using what we've done so far and what even projections that we have, and especially getting easier now with AI coming out on kind of predicting some models out there, we can help say, this is what we believe could happen. And I think it's really important. I really want to say this to all data people out there too, is don't just focus on the internal data, look at external data as well and see what our competition is dealing with and what the economic climate is for next year. And that holistically will give you a picture and more importantly, a story to tell to help guide the decision at the end of the day.
Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the balance between helping and guiding. I think there's one school of thought that is kind of very, centralized. The business asks a question to the centralized analytics reporting function.
Hmm.
They generate a report that gives an answer. These types of requests are important and inescapable. I personally think that there's also value in the centralized reporting team, if it is, and however centralized that is, also bringing unasked for insights. Obviously, the business, you have to balance that, right? But talk to me a little bit about your advice on striking the right balance of kind of generating value in addition to just kind of like undertaking the tasks that we're asked for.
Yeah, that's great. The way I see help is reducing time. If someone comes to me and say, "Hey, I need this," like, how can I help reduce time? Because a lot of us still live in the Excel world, which is great. Not bashing Excel, but if I can help you automate that report, that's to me helping you reduce the time to then focus on guiding you through look at the data and say, what are we seeing together? And say, can is this something we can put action upon? So to summarize that, help is reducing time, guiding is working together on delivering those actionable insights through different charts, and then saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? And then together and say, okay, together, do we think this is the recommendation we should make? And to me, that's guiding.
I like that a lot. One of the things that you mentioned there was Excel. I would say that Excel is the most common currency of data and information transfer.
Hmm.
I think that's pretty safe. I also share your view that Excel has been a revolutionary tool as far as facilitating data driven decision making. It's also been my experience that there are a lot of people that use it exclusively that may be unaware of some of the things that you mentioned.
Hmm.
Which tools are used is, I think, I won't say irrelevant, but close to irrelevant. Talk to me a little bit, right? If I'm a previous version of myself that's just working my fingers to the bone, making and chopping and dicing analyses and all that stuff, hammering it all out in Excel. What are some of the things that you can teach me to be aware of from that kind of automation and reducing time perspective?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I know Ryan, you know analytics, right? It's kind of hard for me to relate it to you and saying what you do versus what you don't know. But to me, I would say through automation, it's to me, I would say Excel, like you were mentioning, it's a universal language, right? Everyone gets it. It's easy to digest that data. You can format it however you want, right? But formatting it however you want causes discrepancies in the data. I bet you
Mhm.
you could build a beautiful Excel report, but so can I. But somewhere, what if we send those numbers up to our leader and then those numbers are different? That's a huge piece of concern for me. So when I see as automation, I feel as also standardization of the data, where we're all looking at one thing together and then we're then making a decision on it. And then if you want to then use that data to extract it to Excel, happy for that, right? Like obviously everyone wants their own type. And when I say extract, right, there's multiple tools out there like Power BI, Tableau, Looker Studio is out there. All great tools for the visualization and driving quicker data decisions, in my opinion, than Excel
Mhm.
does. But at the end of the day, automation through standardization is what I see the value of non Excel work.
I love that. I think for me, that idea of standardization, I think it's actually the same idea, just a different perspective, which is the concept of reusability.
Hmm.
So, my business is centered mostly around Microsoft tech, Power BI, Azure, all that stuff. And there are lots of other great tools out there. I'm certainly not blind to that. It's just kind of what I have skills in. And I used to do a lot of training. I trained at this point probably thousands of people, and kind of most of them were the Excel crowd, like could do, a VLOOKUP and a pivot table, and they were kind of caught in that place of, okay, I got to do a monthly report.
Hmm.
So I'm going to go to the source. I'm going to get my monthly export. I'm going to clean that up and filter and change and, replace some stuff. And then maybe I have some external data over here. I got to merge all that together. And then, I'm doing all of this in Excel, and then bang, you make your pivot table, send the report out. Like that was the monthly reporting cadence. And I had dozens of reports, and then we have quarterly and annual and all this stuff. The thing that is most exciting to me, and I think is most exciting, the thing that got me the most light bulbs when I was teaching people how to use this stuff was you should only have to do that part once. And if I can connect to that data source, I can take all those steps, pull in those additional files, and then that's automated. That part is done forever.
Right.
And I can move that to a 0-click refresh where now I'm just, like, going to a URL and I see the results of that analysis, and it took me 0 work to get there each month, quarter, year, whatever.
Yeah.
That to me was the thing that got people so excited. And I think that also connects to exactly what you're talking about. If that process is done one time and is then used by everybody else that wants to answer that similar question, well, now we're all playing off the same sheet of music.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that I would be hopeful that a listener takes away is the repetitive data prep stuff can be automated now.
Yes.
I want to change gears a little bit with you. One of the things that both of us have quite a bit of experience with that we haven't had the opportunity to dig into too much on the podcast is the area of data analytics reporting that surrounds and supports sales. I found this to be one of the most fun and interesting areas within analytics because there's so much like psychology and game theory and all of that stuff that goes into not just reporting the numbers, but also hopefully motivating and driving performance. It was one of the areas that I felt like I had the most agency to actually make an impact in the organization. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with sales reporting.
Ryan, I am so glad you agree. Sales is fun. The sales reporting is fun because one, uh, the sales guys or like the whole sales team, they're just fun people. So they're energetic people, right? They work well with you because they want to hit their numbers. So you see that aspect. Another aspect, you actually see where the business is driving, what's like, what economic changes are happening, what's driving in those sales. And a great example I can give you is actually during the pandemic when I was working as a sales reporting analyst, I was noticing an uptick in. So during the pandemic time, I was working for a laser company that would get in warehouses and kind of help measure throughput. So we started seeing a rise in sales for food, right? Because obviously, during the pandemic, food was super important on making sure it was clean. Everyone was kind of going crazy about is my food not clean? So we saw an uptick in those sales, and it was interesting to see is like, wow, things are shifting. And then working with our sales people on saying the incentives around the regions and seeing which region is doing really well was really fun. And then the whole game theory was putting them all on a list and saying, this is where you stand against your region and showcasing how you're doing month over month, year over year, really helped motivate some of the sales members on trying to hit those numbers as well as trying to find new perspectives from old leads that they never thought they had again. So it's really cool as a dynamic view of the funnel that they bring in versus what they missed in the past. So it's a lot that salespeople deal with, which I kind of admire about them. And they can get kind of sucked into the data too much, but because they are numbers driven, but to kind of help them reel back and say, hey, this is how well you're doing. Here's some potential leads that you could have missed out. And especially during the pandemic, I noticed we're coming out of our dead dead leads now coming back, which was awesome to see, and they were excited that we were able to give them that data so quickly to help uh, drive more sales and revenue.
Yeah, I definitely share your admiration for salespeople. Um, Number one, I respect and wish that I had the thick skin
Yeah, same.
that a
It's
salesperson has.
incredible.
You know, it takes a lot of armor to get out there and just hear like, never call me again, click, never bang all day. Just, putting in the work to try and get to someone that you can, that wants help. Um, I think one of the other things that I love that you mentioned is they definitely are some of at least in my experience, my most excited report consumers. When we build new insights for a sales team, they're one of the few groups of people in general building reports and databases and things like that. Nobody ever calls you up and is like, "Hey, the database didn't crash today. Just wanted to say thanks." You're, you know, like, they were actually like, you'd put out a new report that might show them like, "Hey, here's the list of the 3 people you should call first today." And they're like, "I closed a new deal off of this, like, you're the man, I love it." Like, just they would get so jacked up about it, or some sort of new sales competition and the numbers, and it really is a lot of fun getting the opportunity to work with salespeople. I wanna dig a little bit deeper into kinda the game theory of it and hear some of your recommendations. So I'll start off with a story. I think I may have told this on the pod months ago, but when Power BI first came out, there were not as many visualizations and custom visualizations as there are now. So I was a little bit more familiar with kind of all the stuff that was out there. And there's this one visualization that is a little bit silly. So kind of at the end of training, we would do this just to like, you know, add some levity to the end of the day. And it's essentially an aquarium. It's an animated aquarium. And the size of each fish in the aquarium corresponds to like the size of a bar on a bar chart. So it's just like the same as a bar chart, but it's these little fish swimming around. And like if one of the numbers goes negative, the poor little fish flips over and floats to the top. So it was kind of fun, but we had a situation where we basically said, okay, for each month, your closed sales correspond to the size of the fish. It was the only visualization on the report. Everybody knew what color their fish was. And there was a TV in the sales bullpen that was it. It just showed the fish swimming around. The salespeople went absolutely feral. Everybody wanted to be the biggest fish. It ended up driving a massive gain in sales.
Wow.
For me, this is something just like so simple, and it like really, really speaks to that kind of like game theory scoreboard mentality. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with driving performance with that type of kind of scoreboardy game theory type mentality.
Yeah. Ryan, that's a genius idea. So I might actually take that away as something I might do. So I appreciate that. Um, so that's gonna be a tough one to beat. But there's two things I can mention about around this. Is um, one away from kind of driving competition is I came up with the geolocation way of driving sales. So I'll give you the example, which is we had in my previous hotel company that I was at, we were trying to figure out how to get more construction workers to come stay at our hotels. And our sales guys were kind of having trouble with the database that we were given to figure out how do we pull that information? How do I know who is ready to that construction worker is starting? So from a database, I was able to find all that data and then spot it to the current hotel that we were trying to drive sales for. And then based off of the distance, I could say, look within a 10-mile range of all the data. So now I just visualize for them to say, if you want to drive 5 miles out, here's a construction project happening and here's the general contractor's name for you to call up and try to get business to. And they loved it because it just quickly showed them on a map how far they have to drive to go get this sale. It was beautiful because it showed the amount of projects, the amount of capability was out there, one for our leaders and one for them to say, this is how much demand is out there. It's not on me, it's just what we're representing. Right. So then I take that and then you push that to a funnel and say, easy of green, yellow, red, and say, look at how this person is doing. They are green, right? I feel like it was a kind of like a little kid when you get the gold star for doing a good job. It's saying, hey, they got green. They're doing really well for the year. Or the red would also kind of drive them to say, I need to get that at least to a yellow to kind of start improving. Um, in terms of the sales, but at the end of the day, that and then if I combine it with another map of if any of the regional guys, I would just make their section brighter and bigger. which would just stick out on a map, and that was a quick way for them to say, "Hey, we're beating in sales this week," and I think that was a good way to do it.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that speaks to the kind of best case scenario in analytics, right? Like, obviously, I could just hand the entire company a giant database and be like, the answers to all of your questions are here. Have at
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
It's really about distilling the right information and putting it in front of the right person. So I think that's such a cool example of saying, hey, we're going to take all the information that's at our fingertips and we're going to distill the most useful piece of that and put it in front of you and then watch the results.
Yeah.
Like, that's such a cool success story. We've gotten to talk a little bit about sales. Another area that is pretty unique in my experience is FP&A that you have some experience with. I do as well. One of the things that I found most interesting about working in FP&A is it's one of the few areas of analytics where you actually not just get to, but have to kind of render opinions on things and like input data. So, like, let's say I'm coming up with, the forecast, right? We're in forecasting season right now.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, we gather all the information from all the teams, they put in some of their numbers, then we may say, okay, well, the company at a corporate level is making investments in X, Y, and Z, so we're going to, you know, reduce our expected cash flow for the next 6 months, and then we expect that to pay off here. And so it was fun. You really got to like understand the business and then take that stuff and imbue it into the data.
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about some of your experiences in FP&A, what you might think is different. What recommendations might you have for people working in that space?
Yeah, and I'll have to admit, Ryan, FP&A analytics was the toughest type of analytics I had to do because it was very, very number oriented, right? It came down to the bottom line and figuring out what can we handle in terms of our spend versus what we're forecasting. And those decisions were difficult for me because I had to purely look at the numbers and say, this is what we see happening. And there's no other way around it, right? And so I struggled with understanding or showcasing to them what the budget was and then kind of implementing on it. And if they had a hard time understanding that, saying that we will not be able to hit those numbers, how do we tweak that? Or how do we then have a uh, business or data discussion to relate to our stakeholders and saying, how do we achieve it or where do we need to make the cuts? So I definitely struggled understanding those type of analytics and talking to stakeholders at a very early stage of my career within that. And planning it out wasn't as easy as you think because when you tell them, hey, we won't be able to hit it, go find out how we can hit those numbers or where is there room in the budget for me to go and use this tool to get more revenue. And it was definitely a struggle at the certain company I was at.
Yeah. The the tangibility and the realness and the connection to money and profit and all of those things, uh, I definitely felt the same, right? FP&A is definitely high pressure analytics. What did you do to grow and improve in that area?
It was putting in the extra time to understand the ins and outs of the business.
Yeah.
And more importantly, because I was an FP&A for multiple different departments, understanding how each leader responds to a certain number and then how to then supplement their response to what they need to hear to help drive a decision.
Yeah. I think this goes back to that balance between, kind of guiding and helping that we talked about earlier. Um, my experience with FP&A um, was that it required me to build up a skill set of like understanding how business works separate from just understanding data and separate from just, communicating with people and learning those people is very important in all areas of analytics, but like really fundamentally understanding the business and how business operations work was a whole new area for me, and I also felt that learning curve was pretty hard. On that note, expanding beyond FP&A and sales, just in general, what is hard for you right now, and what are you doing to meet the challenge?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of my success in my career so far has been being the bridge between IT and the business. I love the conversations that I have to have with IT to get certain data because then at the end of the day, it impresses the business on getting their data quicker and getting to the insights and the analytics quicker. But I think I've been blessed with the different IT structures I've had in the past. And right now, um, I'm dealing with a lean team at the on both sides of IT and the business. But more importantly, I'm also dealing with my business being very data driven. And that's been challenging me to improve my own analytics and my analysis at the same time, meeting the requirements they need on the IT side. So to summarize that, I'm trying to work on my analytics improvement at the same time, my IT infrastructure on the speed of getting that data. And so a lot of it is meetings and trying to negotiate why our data or my data is a priority over the companies. And right. And that's a huge thing to deal with when I have FP&A and operations saying, no, they're more important. And obviously, how do I then define myself as being more important than them? And those are the discussions I've now been kind of working on to figure out how do I, one, communicate that well, and two, negotiate it well as.
So we've gotten over the course of the podcast to learn a lot from you and from your experience. I'd like to give the listeners a chance to learn about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself outside of work.
You don't want to do that, Ryan. I'm kidding. Yeah, about me. Been in Boston most of my life. I absolutely love it here. Big time Celtics fan. So if you ever watch a game, you'll probably see me, hopefully in the TV, just cheering them on as loud as I can.
I love it.
Uh, Big fan of that. I like to get myself outdoors as well. I play a good amount of basketball and pickleball, and pretending that I'm good at tennis is kind of one of my good hobbies as well. And then on the side, I do a lot of, I've been trying to get more into real estate at the moment, building up my real estate portfolio. And it's kind of helped me understand the communities which I buy my properties at, which has been honestly the best part of understanding my neighbors and seeing what their community issues are. It's been a great way for me to kind of get out of this 9 to 5 and kind of really connect with the people around me.
I love that. I love the concept that it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. I think there are a lot of ways to buy and own real estate. And I think thinking about the community and what they're looking for, and then kind of providing places that people are excited to be or stay is really cool. I mean, no surprise, right? The person that works in the hospitality industry is thinking about hospitable ways, to provide value to the community. I love that. If there's anybody that liked something that you had to say, wants to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn, checking messages and just understanding the landscape of overall business and the economy itself. So I'm happy to talk to anyone that reaches out on LinkedIn and do another podcast like this.
I love it. Kaushik, this has been a podcast filled with experience and expertise in a lot of diverse areas, right? We got to talk about, sales, FP&A, like general data stuff, a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. I think this was an episode that a large percentage of listeners can find something for themselves in. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on to share all that experience and expertise. I know that I certainly enjoyed it. I think the listeners will as well.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I really appreciated this. It's really good to reflect on what you do so many times because we live in a very fast world, and it's really this was nice to kind of reflect on things we've done and how to now use that moving forward.
Yeah. Speaking of the listeners, if you made it this far, thanks so much for listening. I want to give you a little bit of an ask. If you like the podcast, tell a friend, give us a like, a subscribe, write us a review, hopefully a good one with as many stars as they offer. It really is kind of the fuel in the engine that keeps us going. Kaushik, thank you again so much. This has been another exciting episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbetterDecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.